The story of Zambia's fight against colonial rule is not one of a single, unified uprising, but of 1,000 small and large acts of defiance that unfolded across its vast plateaus and river valleys. Unlike the dramatic pitched battles seen elsewhere in Africa, the resistance in what became Northern Rhodesia was often fragmented, localized, and deeply connected to the specific grievances of each community. Yet, from the first trickle of European explorers and concession seekers in the 1890s, the people of this land never accepted the yoke of the British South Africa Company, BSAC, quietly. Their resistance evolved from the flash of a spear to the quiet formation of welfare societies, from prophetic visions of a new world to the organized clatter of a mine workers' strike. The spear and the Maxim gun, early armed confrontations. The most dramatic early act of defiance came from the Ngoni people in the east. Under their warrior king, Mpezeni, also spelled Mpezeni, the Ngoni had carved out a formidable state around present-day Chipata, maintaining their military traditions long after their migration from the south. As Kazakh agents and Portuguese traders began to circle his kingdom, Mpezeni initially tried to play them against each other, even granting a concession to a German adventurer. But when the company's prospectors flooded his land, he knew the time for diplomacy was over. In 1897, with over 4,000 warriors, Mpezeni declared the treaties he had signed null and void and issued a declaration of war against the British. His son and general, Crown Prince Nsingo, assembled an even larger force of around 10,000 men and attacked flat positions at Fort Jameson in December 1897, initially forcing the British to retreat. The victory, however, was short-lived. The British counterattacked with overwhelming force, deploying the devastating Maxim gun, which mercilessly mowed down the gallant Ngoni fighters. The Ngoni capital fell in February 1898. Prince Nsingo was captured, court-martialed, and executed at dawn. His broken father, King Mpezeni, was paraded in chains before his own people and died of depression soon after his release. It was a brutal end, but the Ngoni resistance marked the last great stand of a warrior kingdom in southern Africa. Further north, along the Luapula River, the powerful kingdom of Mwata Kazembe faced a similar fate. The Eastern Lunda polity, once a mighty empire, was a shadow of its former self when it confronted both the British and Belgian empire builders in the 1890s. The kingdom was easily subdued by Tsat police forces after a battle in late 1895. Yet, unlike the Ngoni, Mwata Kazembe chose a path of pragmatic negotiation. After his defeat in 1899, he managed to secure a settlement with the colonial rulers, a strategic decision that allowed his successors to retain a degree of continuity and influence throughout the colonial period. It was a form of resistance through survival, a quiet refusal to be erased. In the West, the Lozi king Lewanika took a different, more tragic path. Fearing attacks from the Ndebele and internal rivals, he sought British protection, believing he was signing a treaty with the crown itself. In June 1890, he was deceived into signing the Lochner concession, which granted mineral and trading rights to the Psac without his full understanding of its implications. When he realized he had been tricked into serving Cecil Rhodes's company rather than the Queen, he felt bitterly betrayed and appealed, unsuccessfully, to the British crown. Lewanika's story is a poignant one, a king who tried to use diplomacy to preserve his kingdom, only to find that the pen he signed with was mightier than the spear he wished he had. The water that failed, prophetic and spiritual resistance. When military resistance was crushed, the spirit of defiance found new vessels, the prophets and the holy. The most potent expression of this was the Watchtower movement, known as Kitawala, a millenarian religious movement that swept through northern Rhodesia in the early 20th century. Drawing on a syncretic mix of Christian millennialism and African spiritual beliefs, its preachers carried an anti-colonial message as fiery as any warriors. During the immense hardships of World War I, when thousands of Africans were conscripted as porters and food supplies were requisitioned, the resentment found a voice in this movement. The Watchtower movement, which the British colonial administration saw as patently anti-colonial, promised a coming apocalypse that would sweep away the white man's rule and establish a black paradise. It directly inspired a rebellion among the Mambu people in the northeast, and its teachings fueled a simmering distrust of colonial authority that lasted for decades. The colonial state responded with arrests and deportations, but the idea that spiritual power could overcome the colonizer never fully died. The strike and the tax revolt, economic resistance as the colonial state consolidated its grip, the most persistent forms of resistance became economic. The PSAC's primary goal was to force Africans into the labor market, and its primary weapon was the hut tax. By levying taxes that could only be paid with cash, the company compelled men to leave their homes and seek work on white-owned farms, or in the mines of southern Rhodesia and the Belgian Congo. This pressure provoked constant, violent, but small-scale, resistance across the country. People refused to pay, hid their cattle, or simply moved away to avoid the tax collector. But the most explosive economic resistance came from the very industrial heart that the colonialists created, the Copperbelt. By the 1930s, thousands of African miners were toiling in terrible conditions for meager wages. In May 1935, a sudden reduction in wages combined with an increase in the native tax for urban dwellers sparked a spontaneous strike across the Rokana, Mufulira, and Roan antelope mines. The Bemba people, through their Mbini dance associations, provided much of the strike's leadership. The strikers threw stones and sticks at compound managers, but the colonial response was swift and lethal. Askari, local soldiers serving European officers, opened fire, killing 6 men and wounding 22. A second, more violent wave of strikes erupted in 1940. Following a successful strike by white miners, African miners also walked out, leading to violent clashes in which 17 African miners were killed and 69 injured. These strikes did not win immediate gains, but they were a turning point. They proved that African labor could shut down the very engine of the colonial economy. This resistance culminated in 1949 with the formation of the African Mine Workers Union, AMU, under the leadership of Lawrence Katilangi, giving organized labor a permanent voice in the struggle against the color bar and racial discrimination. The pen and the petition, the rise of modern nationalism. The final, and ultimately successful, phase of resistance was political. It began not in the mines, but in the mission stations. In 1912, 2 educated Africans, Donald Sill and David Kanda, the father of Zambia's first president, formed the Mwenzo Welfare Association. These early welfare societies were the first political organizations in the country, created to bring African views to the attention of the government. They were moderate in their demands, asking for better housing, sanitation, and clinics, but their very existence was an act of political assertion. This network of welfare societies grew, and in 1948, they federated to form the Northern Rhodesia African Congress, NRAC, the country's first nationalist political party. Godwin Lewanika, a son of the Lozi king, was its first president. In the 1950s, under the more militant leadership of Harry Nkambula and a young Kenneth Kaunda, the renamed Northern Rhodesian African National Congress, RANC, became the leading force against the British plan to create the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland, a scheme designed to entrench white settler power. Then RANC organized boycotts of shops that enforced the color bar and sent delegations to London to protest the Federation. When Nkambula and Kaunda were jailed for distributing subversive literature, it only radicalized the movement. By the late 1950s, the struggle had shifted from petitions to mass mobilization. In 1960, Kaunda took over the more militant United National Independence Party, UNIP, and began negotiations for independence in earnest. From Mpezeni's final charge against the Maxim gun to Sill's first signature on a welfare petition, the resistance in Zambia was a slow, painful, and often overlooked chapter in Africa's anti-colonial struggle. It was not one battle, but a ceaseless, evolving current that flowed from the spear, through the spirit into the strike, and finally, into the vote. On October 24, 1964, when the Union Jack was lowered and the new flag of Zambia was raised over Lusaka, it was the culmination of over 7 decades of quiet, desperate, and heroic refusal to bow.